Hi Daniel, this is the feedback from the mock exam that you did just before Christmas. So for question 1, you've scored 3 marks out of a possible 4. It says choose 4 statements below which are true. You've only actually ticked 3, so you've only got the 3 marks because the 3 answers that you gave were right. Just be careful as well because it says shade the boxes, you've ticked them, so make sure you read the instructions of what you've got to do. So you've got 3 marks there anyway, just make sure that you do the right number of answers. Moving on to question 2, which asks you to write a summary of the differences between Eddie and Henry. You have clearly done this, you've read the question properly as seen by the fact that you've underlined Eddie and Henry. You've stated that Eddie's 14 years old in school, shows his smart side. You've given us a quote to back it up. You've gone on and described Henry's a young boy, doesn't live at home, lives far away, not seen his dad for 2 years. I think you needed to put the quote in there to back that up. You've said that he's scared, which is good, yeah. He's missing his dad. Again, it's good, and he's worried that he'll be found out for writing to his dad. It's a big difference between Eddie and Henry. Eddie takes his dad for granted, which is a good inference there, reading between the lines, compared to Henry, who misses his dad. And language based on how they express themselves to the dads, which is good. And again, you've said Eddie has a home life where it's a breeze, nothing to complain about. Yeah, he has a good life. Where Henry lives in a place where communication is old-fashioned letter. Yeah, you could have gone on to say that he was lonely, and so on and so forth. So if we look at the mark scheme, so for level 2, it says show some interpretation from one or both texts. When you've considered both texts, you've attempted some inference from both texts, so you've read between the lines and given us information that you've picked up on, not what's actually written there. You've given some quotes, however, I think you needed to give some more quotes to back up each point that you've made, and you've made statements to show some differences between the texts. So I think we've covered all of those, but I think to be getting up to the next level, you needed to include more texts and clearer inference. You could have said that Eddie seems to have a fun relationship with his dad because, you know, he makes fun of him and it's all taken in good spirits, whereas Henry's relationship with his dad is quite cold and distant, isn't it, because he's not seen him for 2 years. The way that they speak to each other, Eddie is a lot more informal and jokey, whereas Henry, his language is much more respectful, possibly that he's a little bit scared of his dad as well. But all in all, I think we can get 4 out of the possible 8 marks for that one, which is a good start. Moving on to question 3, where you're asked to analyse how Henry uses language to try to influence his father. You started off well, as you said, he starts by expressing how he feels to feel the emotions of his dad, which made me unhappy. However, you've not used any terminology, so you could have said he uses the adjective, which made me unhappy. You've talked about the promise that you made, which is increasing the dad's feelings of guilt, and you've also talked about the fact that he's asked the father to reply to the family friend rather than to Henry. However, you've not really focused on the words that are telling you how he's trying to influence his father, and you've not used the terminology, so this is going to limit your score for this question to a level 1. So if we look at the mark scheme, it says show simple awareness of language, offers simple comment on the effect of language. Well, I think you have done that to a certain extent. Select simple references or textual details. Again, you have used some quotes in there, but make simple use of subject terminology, not always appropriately. You haven't used any of the terminology in there, so that's going to limit your score to 2 out of possible 12 marks for this question. As it is a 12-mark question, you need to include at least 4 points, giving your example, the terminology and the effects that it's trying to produce on his father. So there were lots of things that you could have included in there. You could have said that he uses repetition of "my dear father" to try and emphasise the fact to his father of how he's missing him, how dear he is to him and how he's missing him. However, what would give you even higher marks on this one would be that if you also said that it could be deliberate use of the phrase by Henry, because the fact that they've not seen each other for 2 years could imply that he actually isn't his dear father or dear, but he's just using that to try and appeal to his father. So it's a deliberate use of the language there. He also uses a simile when he compares himself or the students at the school to bears rather than Christians, again trying to emphasise the fact of that how badly treated they are. He uses adjectives and adverbs when he's talking about the conditions. The bread is nearly black, and made of the worst barley meal. He also uses emotive language and a possible hyperbole when he says, "I hope, my dear father, you will let me come home at Christmas, that we may once again meet again alive, if God permit me to live as long." So he's really emphasising the fact and trying to make his dad feel guilty that if he doesn't let him come home, then he may never see him again because he might not survive the conditions at the school. So he's really trying to play on his father's heartstrings there. Moving on to question 4. I don't think you've read the question carefully here, because it says for this question you need to refer to the whole of source A together with source B, the father's letter to the family friend. So source B consists of 2 letters, one from Henry to his dad and one from Henry's dad to the family friend, and it's that letter that you need to be looking at, because you're looking at how the 2 writers convey their different attitudes to parenting and education. And the writer of the first text is J, Eddie's dad, and the writer of the second source that you've been asked to look at is Henry's dad, writing to the family friend. So you start off okay, and you've understood here that you're looking at J as the writer. So he's the dad who lives with his son and tries what he can do to get involved with his son, and he's aware that he's not good at maths and English. However, from there on, you've switched to talking about Eddie and Henry's attitudes, which is not what you're asked to do in the question. It's all about, although this paragraph here is referring to Jay and his attitude, because this quote is actually from Jay from the text. Finally, he looks up at me from the computer. Who needs teachers to humiliate you when your son can do it so effectively? So if you talked a little bit about what's implied by that quote and the method that is used, you could say that Jay, Eddie's dad, uses humour and sarcasm to get his point across when he uses a rhetorical question to say how he feels about Eddie's responses to him. However, because you've not really read the question and answered the question, clearly your marks are going to be limited to level 1. So if we look here, I think we can only take 1 mark for show simple awareness of ideas or perspectives, because of the little bit that you did in the beginning regarding Jay's ideas. So it's unfortunate that you've misread the question, so that suggests that you need to make sure that you do consider the question properly. I know you've underlined the relevant bits here, but you've missed out this fact here that it wasn't the whole of source B you were looking at, it was the second text, and you were looking at the writers, not the characters Eddie and Henry, because we've looked at them in question 2.